The headline in the newspaper left Annette completely unable to sit still. That madman had actually started a war just to find her. Now things had truly blown up. To get his sister back, Lee had even offered an astronomical bounty, a full 5.8 trillion gold coins. He had practically emptied the national treasury. Annette was completely dumbfounded. That boy was definitely insane. And what was even more ridiculous was this. Kyle had actually joined in too. Just because someone had touched his bakery, he wanted to wipe out their entire family. These people were more abnormal than the last. Annette's head was about to explode. The three of them were crazier than one another. She thought she would be safe hiding here, but suddenly, the room went silent. Before she could react, a familiar shadow appeared behind her. The thing she feared most had come true. Hisline had actually found her. Heavy footsteps drew closer and closer. The man who made the entire empire tremble was now standing right in front of her. Hisline pinched Annette's chin and laughed softly. "Annette, so this is where you were hiding." He held Annette tightly in his arms, his voice filled with obsessive madness. "I missed you so much I nearly went insane." Staring at this demon who had suddenly appeared, Annette froze completely in place, unable to say a single word. Hisline used a red ribbon to bind their hands tightly together. He stared at Annette, his tone filled with obsessive madness. "If you want to run away now, you'll have to cut off my hand first." Annette desperately cried for help in her heart. Could someone please save her? Just then, a familiar voice came from the doorway. "Sister." Annette froze completely. Lee had actually found her too. Now everything was a total mess. Two madmen had actually run into each other. Lee grabbed Annette's hand, completely ignoring the red ribbon. He held her tightly from behind, his voice so gentle it made one's skin crawl. "Sister, why did you lie to me? You clearly promised you would never leave me." As he murmured, he revealed a dangerous smile. How should a disobedient child be punished? Before Annette could break free, a voice suddenly came from outside the door. This time, the situation completely spiraled out of control. Kyle had actually chased her here too. He humbly grabbed the corner of Annette's clothes and begged her to stay by his side. Who could have imagined that this seemingly refined man was actually the leader of that bloodthirsty organization? Hisline gripped Annette's wrist tightly, his voice so cold it filled people with despair. "Until the day you die, don't even think of leaving me." Lee smiled gently. "Sister, you should know that I will always love you." Even Kyle knelt on the ground and pleaded, "Owner, please spend the rest of your life with me." Annette was completely numb, no matter how she thought about it. She couldn't understand why these three men were crazier than the last. Why were they all so deeply obsessed with her? In truth, all this chaos had to start from that day, the day that changed her fate, the day she first met Hisline. 12-year-old Annette was busy with an important matter. She had heard that Hisline was hiding like a wild beast, so she decided to lure him out herself. The bait was freshly baked bread. As long as he got hungry, he would definitely follow the scent over. Annette kept watching the kitchen for 7 full days. Just when she was about to give up, there was finally movement under the table. A hand quietly reached toward the bread. The target had finally appeared. The boy from her rumors was right here. Annette now moved as quietly as possible. She had to approach him without making a sound. She had heard this boy's instincts were sharper than a beast's, and the slightest movement would give her away. Although she kept muttering inwardly that he must look especially fierce, she still mustered her courage and appeared directly in front of him. But once she saw him, Annette was completely speechless. What terrifying monster was this supposed to be? He was far too cute. Annette took the initiative to greet him and warmly introduced herself. So this adorable boy was Hisline. She thought it would be a beautiful beginning, but the other party was very cold. He even told her to stay away. Hisline said hoarsely, "Stay away from me. Talking to me will make you dirty." Annette froze completely. What exactly had he gone through for an 11-year-old child to say something like that? Annette reached out directly and cupped Hisline's face. She wanted this boy to look into her eyes. Annette said, word by word, "You are not dirty at all. One day, you will definitely become someone incredible." Looking at Annette's brilliant smile, Hisline froze completely. He probably hadn't realized the weight of those words yet, but that was exactly what happened. In the future, Hisline truly became a noble existence who looked down upon the world. Who could have thought that I had transmigrated into a dark, tragic novel? Even the title sounded dangerous. It was called Power of the Manor. The plot was full of disturbing content, with all kinds of coercive methods appearing one after another. It was simply unbearable to look at. The story began at an orphanage called the Forest Orphanage. On the surface, it was a shelter, but in reality, it was a secret training base. The orphans there would have their potential forcibly developed, then be sold like goods to those hypocritical nobles. In the eyes of the wealthy, these children were not lives at all, but expensive trophies used for showing off. In this novel, my favorite character was Hae-in-lee. He was a classic top-tier villain. Although his birth wasn't exactly honorable, he perfectly inherited his father's genius for magic, and his looks were beyond reproach. But who could have imagined that beneath that beautiful appearance was a hell-level rotten temper? He was like a rabid chihuahua. The moment he disliked someone, he would instantly switch into mad dog mode. Especially when it came to his line, Hae-in-lee was rotten to the core. Not only did he humiliate him in public, Hae-in-lee pointed at him and cursed, "You filthy thing. You're nothing but a useless cripple." Again and again, he attacked him, trampling Hisline's dignity completely underfoot. Hisline's identity was actually very important. Not only was he an abandoned bloodline of the imperial family, destructive power also flowed within him. But to him, that power was more like an inescapable curse. Before he learned to control it, his five senses were so sharp they nearly drove him mad. To avoid that pain, he could only hide alone in a cave. But the real nightmare had only just begun. He encountered a trap in the cave, and his leg was severely injured. That left him disabled for life. Not only did Hae-in-lee show no sympathy, he mocked him even more cruelly as a cripple, believing that he deserved every bit of suffering. Looking at Hisline's cold red eyes, it was clear that sooner or later he would settle this debt. Finally, Hisline completely turned his fate around. He became the lofty crown prince. The hatred that had been suppressed for so long erupted completely at that moment. Everything Hae-in-lee had once done to him, he would personally take back. That kind of revenge was almost impossible to watch. Hisline sneered and said, "Now you won't even be able to use your ankles." That dark, tragic plot had left me traumatized when I read the book. But who could have thought that I would actually transmigrate into Annette, a minor character? Just as I was doubting life itself, a voice suddenly rang beside my ear. "Annette, what are you thinking about? You're so lost in thought." It turned out Sasha was calling me. She was earnestly explaining to someone that zoning out while eating would keep them from growing taller. Sasha sighed and said, "But Annette is still taller than me, even when she zones out." Seeing her lying on the table and whining about how unfair heaven was, I quickly used my ultimate child coaxing move. "If you eat more, your magic will become stronger. So hurry and eat." The moment Sasha heard that, she perked up completely. "Really? Then I have to eat 2 bowls today." Although it was only a kind lie, looking at the bread in my hand, I suddenly thought of someone else. I had to bring this to Hisline. Late at night, Annette had already packed her things and set out. Since she knew the future plot, she absolutely could not just sit around and wait. Her plan had 2 steps in total. First, she had to let Hisline, who was hiding in the forest, live like an ordinary child too. And the second point, also the most crucial step, was that Hae-in-lee and Hisline had to get along. In the original story, their first meeting was simply a disaster. It was also the beginning of all their hatred. If she didn't want to be completely destroyed in the future, this part of the plot had to change starting now. Hae-in-lee's line back then, "How disgusting," had simply trampled Hisline's self-esteem underfoot, especially that injured leg. It became the dead, not in their relationship. Annette decided to act first. As long as she saved Hisline's leg and then made them build a relationship from childhood, the future tragedy could definitely be avoided. And so, she began her path of shamelessly currying favor. "Hisline, I'm here." To get closer to him, Annette really used up all the patience of her lifetime. When she brought food, she was ignored. When she spoke, she was treated like air. It was simply one-sided enthusiasm met with cold indifference. Just when she was about to be unable to hold on, the boy who had remained silent all this time finally looked up at her. Hisline's call of Annette made all her efforts meaningful. Annette ran over happily, still clutching the bread she had secretly brought out. "Hisline, this is your favorite." She stared at Hisline's face and asked, "What's wrong? You look so unwell." Before Annette could react, she saw Hisline clutch his leg in pain. Blood had already seeped out. This was bad. Annette asked with a trembling voice, "Are you hurt?" Her heart sank. In the end, she was still one step too late. The thing she had feared most had still happened. Hisline was still stubbornly insisting that he was perfectly fine. Annette shouted anxiously, "You're hurt this badly, and you're still calling it nothing?" Hisline still forced himself to say it didn't hurt. Annette was so angry tears were about to fall. This was clearly a lie. What should she do now? How could she save him? At this critical moment, Annette suddenly remembered that she still had that thing with her. As long as that thing was still there, Hisline's leg could definitely be healed. Annette told him to stay, put obediently, and leave the rest to her. Faced with doubt, she acted completely confident. Who could have thought that this little girl would take Sasha and sneak into the infirmary in the middle of the night to steal something? If they made the slightest noise, it would all be over. Annette and Sasha were carrying out a secret mission. Just like detectives in a book, they had to retrieve the most important thing. But the problem now was that to get to the infirmary, they had to pass that room, and that man just so happened to hate closing doors. This was a dead end. Sasha was worried about what to do, but Annette had long prepared a backup plan. She directly pulled out the trump card she had prepared. This was a hypnotic candle specially designed to deal with adults. As long as the flame lit up, even the strongest expert would obediently fall asleep. Sasha couldn't help sighing in admiration. Not only was Annette good at studying, even when it came to doing bad things, she was a genius. The flame lit the specially made candle, and smoke spread through the air. Before that man could react, he had already fallen completely asleep. The plan went extremely smoothly. The two of them took the chance to slip into the room and began searching for that bottle of rare potion. A treasure like this definitely wouldn't be left lying around. Annette stared at those inconspicuous drawers. The real target had to be hidden inside one of them. Found it. The target is in that cabinet. Annette told Sasha to keep watch at the door. Nothing could go wrong now. Whether they succeeded depended on this final move. As the cabinet door slowly opened, that glow finally appeared. They had done it. The secret mission was a complete success. Now Hisline could finally be saved. The detective game ended here. Annette sent Sasha away. What came next was the real main event. She hurried back to the room and, without another word, told Hisline to stretch out his leg, still clutching the treasure she had just obtained. Hisline had not yet figured out what this girl was up to. Annette merely chuckled and told him to wait and watch the show. The crystal-clear potion flowed down along the wound. Those shocking injuries finally had a chance to heal. Blue light gathered around him. Hisline froze completely. The wound that had originally hurt terribly was actually healing little by little. Annette leaned in and asked, "How is it? It doesn't hurt anymore, right?" Hisline nodded and said, "It doesn't hurt at all." Only then did he react and ask softly, "You went out in the middle of the night just for this?" Annette smugly shook the medicine bottle and said, "That's right. This is a recovery potion. Although it's only average for serious injuries, it's enough to save a life." But she still put on a stern face and warned him to be twice as careful in the future. After all, something this good could not be obtained every time. In the original story, this treasure was supposed to be Hae-In-Lee's prize. That guy would only use it as a joke. He would never use it to save a life like this. Annette noticed that Hisline seemed a little dazed and quickly asked if it still hurt. But Hisline said quietly, "It just feels a little strange." This was the first time someone had ever taken care of him when he was injured. Annette's heart sank. She suddenly realized a cruel fact. In the original plot, Hisline was always alone. No matter how much pain he was in or how miserable he felt, there had never been anyone by his side. Annette held his hand and announced with a serious expression, "From now on, I will always take care of you." Hisline was completely confused and subconsciously asked why. But Annette's reason was so absurd it made people both laugh and cry. She said confidently, "Because you're good looking." This direct hit left Hisline unable to recover for a long while. He helplessly reached out and gently touched Annette's face, then replied softly, "The good-looking one is clearly you." Now, it was Annette's turn to freeze. She had only wanted to save him. How had she ended up getting flirted with by this boy instead? Annette was completely stunned. This boy was only 11 years old. How could he speak so smoothly? She quickly shouted, "Stop joking." But Hisline was very serious, without any intention of backing down. Since the conversation had already reached this point, Annette simply got straight to the topic. Living in a cave all the time was too dangerous. She took the initiative to stretch out her hand and asked, "Do you want to come with me?" Hisline did not hesitate. He softly answered, "Okay." Their two hands clasped tightly together. From this moment on, their fates changed completely. In the middle of the night, Annette actually brought Hisline through the corridor while pretending to be a ghost. Hisline was covered in a bedsheet and complained uncomfortably, "Where exactly are we going?" Annette quickly told him to shut up. If they were caught, the consequences would be no joke. She deliberately scared him and said they would be doomed if they were discovered, directly making Hisline fall silent. But as long as they weren't discovered, the plan could succeed. She grabbed Hisline's hand and immediately disappeared into the darkness. Oh no, the thing she had feared most had still happened. Before they had gone far, the two of them were caught red-handed. A voice from the darkness sounded ice cold, asking where they were trying to sneak off to in the middle of the night. When Annette turned around, she realized the situation was very bad. She had actually run into the most difficult woman to deal with. Mimosa, this housekeeper, who had once framed Hisline, was holding a candle and staring fixedly at them. They had really walked right into danger. Mimosa's tone was cold as she questioned Annette, the model student, about why she was wandering around the hallway in the middle of the night. Annette could only lie through her teeth and pretend she had just come out of the bathroom, hoping to muddle through quickly. She knew very well that Mimosa was notoriously strict. If she saw through her, everything would be over. Now she could only gamble. She had a bet that the other party would let her off because she was a model student. Annette smiled apologetically while promising to return to her room, all while tightly tugging Hisline behind her, hurrying to slip away before Mimosa's expression changed. Just as they were about to leave, Mimosa suddenly stopped her on the spot. The whip in her hand pointed directly at that ghost. The other party immediately had to reveal himself. Seeing that they were about to be exposed, Annette's mind raced, and she directly dragged Haeinli out as a shield, shouting, "This is Haeinli." She braced herself and made up an excuse, saying Haeinli was afraid of ghosts, so he had wrapped himself up like one. As Annette laughed loudly, she prayed frantically in her heart, "Please let this fool her." Fortunately, Mimosa actually believed it. She warned Annette not to let it happen again, then turned and left. Annette could hardly believe it. This desperate move had actually succeeded. She quickly brought Hisline into an empty room with no one inside. No one usually came here, so it was temporarily safe. Annette told him to stay here for now. Hisline obediently nodded. But looking at the dirty boy in front of her, Annette began to worry again. Hisline had an extreme fear of water. It was a psychological scar left behind from past abuse. If he didn't bathe, he would definitely be discovered for violating the school rules. But forcing him now would only make him suffer more. Just as Annette was struggling over this, she suddenly realized there was another, even more fatal matter waiting for her to handle. Annette mysteriously told Hisline that she would take him to meet an important person tomorrow. Hisline looked curious. Who exactly could make her so excited? The next day, the main character of the whole scene finally appeared. It was Haeinli. Julius proudly announced on the stage that in this world where talent was everything, Haeinli was the only top-tier genius, the seedling everyone dreamed of. Everyone below the stage was stunned. Not only was this child beautiful, his internal magic power was said to be astonishing. Now, Haeinli had completely become the center of attention. This child was practically a moving bomb. Julius said bluntly that Haeinli's magic was absurdly powerful. If he did not wear a specially made suppressor, that small body could lose control at any moment. The Marquis looked at him like he was a treasure, even casually touching his head and praising him for being so cute. Haeinli smiled brilliantly and spoke words of thanks, but at that very moment, his disgust had already reached its peak. As soon as the others left, he immediately changed his expression. He felt that the hand that had touched him was simply filthy. He was so disgusted that he nearly exploded on the spot. Julius glared at him coldly and told him to shut his mouth. It seemed this top-tier genius was far harder to handle than he appeared. Haeinli could not endure these days any longer. For 2 whole weeks, he had been like an animal in a pet shop, taken everywhere for people to inspect and choose. Julius still wanted to talk about his future, thinking this was a rare social opportunity. But Haeinli only had Annette in his heart. After not seeing her for 2 whole weeks, he felt like he was about to die. In order to go back, he even used himself as leverage, threatening that if they didn't turn around, he would injure himself. Julius could no longer sit still. Haeinli was the most valuable asset. If something really happened to him, the loss would be enormous. The carriage could only turn around at once and head straight for the forest orphanage. Before the carriage had even stopped, Haeinli impatiently rushed out. He had held back that cry of sister for far too long. Sasha had seen through his thoughts long ago and directly handed him a mysterious letter. The The letter invited him to meet alone under the big tree. Hae-in-lee was delighted, thinking he could finally spend time alone with her. He rushed excitedly to the place, and sure enough, Annette was waiting there. But before he could be happy for long, his sister's next words were like a bucket of cold water. She said she wanted to introduce a new friend. Then she pulled Hisline out from behind her. Looking at their hands held together, Hae-in-lee froze completely. This was not the reunion he wanted at all. The atmosphere instantly became extremely awkward. Annette thought her move was foolproof. In order to stop Hae-in-lee from disliking his new friend, she had specially washed Hisline clean, scrubbing him for a full hour. After all, in the original story, Hae-in-lee had cursed him as dirty the first time they met. As long as the first impression changed, these two would definitely get along well. Annette smiled and introduced Hisline, full of anticipation that the two of them could shake hands and make peace. But what happened? Hae-in-lee stared at the hand that his sister was holding, and only one thought filled his mind. So dirty. Absolutely filthy. Annette's hour of effort had been completely wasted. Not only had the knot between these two not been untied, it had become even tighter. Hae-in-lee's mouth truly showed no mercy. The moment he opened it, he cursed, scaring Annette badly. Annette quickly stopped him, afraid that he would ruin his own future path. But Hae-in-lee didn't listen at all. He even wanted to cut ties with Hisline. He shoved Hisline away and shouted that his sister belonged to him, telling the other boy to get lost. Hisline was not easy to bully either. He directly asked, "Why is she yours?" But Hae-in-lee's answer shocked everyone. He said that he would marry Annette and make her his wife in the future. Now the whole place exploded. Annette was completely dumbfounded. "Who discussed this with you?" Hisline's next move was absolutely ruthless. He sneered and told Hae-in-lee, "Since you call her sister, then you can forget about marrying her in this lifetime." Hae-in-lee was completely stunned. So all those times he had called her sister had actually personally ruined his future happiness. But his reaction was quick enough. He immediately pointed at Hisline and counterattacked, saying this guy looked even younger than him. So why didn't he call her sister? When Annette heard this, she felt it made perfect sense. She immediately turned to look at Hisline. With a serious expression, she announced, "From now on, you have to call me sister too. Do you hear me?" Hisline was completely stunned. He had wanted to dig a pit for someone else, only to drop a stone on his own foot. His seniority was now completely crushed. Who could have thought Hisline would be so cooperative? That once sister melted people's hearts. Annette seemed fairly calm on the surface, but inside, she had long been captured by his cuteness. Now, it was Hae-in-lee's turn to have a mental breakdown. He had wanted to trip the other boy up, but instead, he had handed him an assist. He was so angry he roared on the spot, telling Hisline to change back to his original way of addressing her at once. Watching Hae-in-lee throw a tantrum, Annette could only look helpless. This large-scale breakdown was simply unbearable to watch. But in Annette's eyes, although Hae-in-lee usually liked to throw little tantrums, he was still a kind child at heart. Perhaps this was what it meant for one thing to subdue another. Annette was still trying hard to smooth things over for Hae-in-lee, saying that he only spoke so sharply because he had been hurt before and hoping Hisline could be more understanding. While Hae-in-lee was sent away, Hisline suddenly asked a crucial question. "Do you like Hae-in-lee a lot?" Annette completely failed to notice the strange atmosphere. She directly gave Hae-in-lee a super good person card and generously admitted that she liked him very much. Hearing this answer, Hisline fell completely silent. He lowered his head, and no one knew what he was thinking. Just as he was about to open his mouth and say something, the door was suddenly thrown open. Mimosa had actually barged in at this moment. The atmosphere instantly dropped to freezing. This time, Mimosa had caught them red-handed. She gripped the whip tightly in her hand and sneered, saying, "Let's see where you can hide now." Annette still wanted to plead for mercy, but Mimosa was clearly serious. In her eyes, Hisline had actually hidden in a cave to avoid bathing. That was simply treating the school rules as meaningless noise. Seeing the teaching whip about to fall, Annette became completely anxious. Hisline had only just begun to open his heart. If he was really beaten now, he would definitely shut himself away completely again. She absolutely could not let that happen. At this critical moment, Annette shouted and directly blocked Mimosa's path. Annette protected Hisline tightly and loudly explained that he had not intentionally broken the rules. He truly had trauma related to water. She begged for one last chance and promised that she would make him behave. The whip in Mimosa's hand still did not lower. She coldly asked, "And if you fail?" This time, Annette went all in. She said directly that if she failed, she was willing to accept all the punishment. Seeing Annette's gaze so determined, Mimosa finally relented. But she also issued a harsh warning on the spot. If Annette messed up when the time came, there would be absolutely no mercy. 3 days. Mimosa only gave her 3 days. If she couldn't handle Hisline in those 3 days, Annette would truly be in trouble. This was really difficult. Annette struggled for an entire day, but Hisline still didn't dare go near the basin. Seeing the agreed deadline drawing closer and closer, there was not the slightest progress. Hisline curled up in the corner and quietly said sorry. He felt that he was too useless and had dragged Annette into punishment with him. Seeing him like this, Annette felt even worse. What method was there to help him overcome his fear of water? Just then, a flash of inspiration suddenly crossed Annette's mind. As if she had thought of a brilliant idea, she left behind the words, "Wait here," then turned and rushed off like the wind. Now it was Hisline's turn to be stunned. What new trick was she going to come up with this time? The secret weapon Annette brought out was actually a basin of soapy water. She excitedly wanted to teach Hisline how to blow bubbles. Heianli, standing nearby, immediately switched on mockery mode and asked if he was stupid, saying he had never even seen such a little kid's toy before. Hisline held the bubble wand and stayed silent for a long while before saying quietly that he had never played with anything like this before, because if he was discovered, it would result in a vicious beating. Hearing this, Annette's heart sank. She did not show sympathy. Instead, she went with the flow and suggested that since he had never played with it before, he should try it all the more now. She held Hisline's hand and guided him to put it into the basin. As long as he was willing to take this step, his fear of water would not be so hard to overcome. Hisline stared at the surface of the water, but the wand in his hand still didn't dare go down. Even if it was only blowing bubbles, to him, it was like crossing an abyss. In the end, he still retreated and apologized softly to Annette, saying he really couldn't do it. Just as the atmosphere became its stiffest, Heianli jumped out and added insult to injury again. While showing off grandly in the water basin, he mocked Hisline as a coward. He even deliberately stuck both hands into the water, as if afraid others wouldn't know how brave he was. Heianli turned around and started fishing for praise from Annette, asking, "Sister, aren't I especially cool?" Looking at this attention seeker, Annette could only sigh helplessly in her heart. This acting was far too exaggerated. Watching Heianli compete for attention, Hisline stood silently at the side. This contrast made him seem even more out of place. Annette's plan seemed to have completely gotten stuck on the first step. Who could have thought that such a simple action would make Hisline hesitate for so long? Under Annette's expectant gaze, he finally took that step. Although his hand was still trembling non-stop, he still held his breath and blew gently, just as Annette had taught him. At that moment, a miracle truly happened. Colorful bubbles instantly filled the sky. The water that had originally made him afraid had actually become so gentle under the sunlight. Even Heianli, standing beside them, was stunned. Annette jumped up and down in excitement. She knew that the iceberg in Hisline's heart had finally begun to melt. Looking at this dreamlike scene before him, Hisline sighed sincerely. So this thing really was quite beautiful. Hisline watched the flying bubbles and said softly, "They're like flowers formed from breath." Annette also nodded beside him. Then Heianli became hooked and urged him to hurry up and blow more. Although Hisline was a little impatient, he still agreed. After all, who could refuse such a request? Annette quickly smoothed things over between them and told them not to quarrel. This warm scene became the most precious memory between them. They still hadn't had enough fun. Annette looked down and saw that the bucket of water was already empty. Hisline seemed to have discovered something and quickly grabbed her. "Sister, look, all the dirt on my hands is gone." It was simply a moment of witnessing a miracle. His originally blackened little hands were now washed completely clean. They were even shining. Annette smiled and asked, "How is it?" "It's actually not scary at all, right?" Looking at his stunned expression, Annette knew that this little guy was finally no longer resisting bathing. Hisline replied softly, "Thank you, Annette." Night fell, and the room gradually quieted. Heianli lay on the bed but still felt a little uneasy. He softly reminded his sister, "Even if I fall asleep, don't leave." Annette gently agreed and asked how his day had been. Hae-in said contentedly. As long as I can be with sister, every day is happy. This feeling of being dependent on made Annette feel that all her hard work was worth it. Although Hisline usually always called Hae-in an annoying brat, in front of Annette, Hae-in was practically a master of sweet talk. He held Annette's hand and said, "Those pretty bubbles today really looked like sister. Because as long as something is beautiful, it makes me think of you." Normally, Annette would definitely have been deeply moved. But today, she kept feeling that something was wrong. There was a knot in her heart, leaving her with no mood to listen to these sweet words. This matter had to start a few days earlier. At the time, Hisline had curled up in the corner and anxiously asked whether this place was really safe. Back then, Annette had patted her chest and guaranteed that only she and Hae-in knew about this secret base. But thinking back on it now, the situation seemed to be getting out of control. In a late-night corridor, the sound of footsteps seemed especially heavy. Annette tentatively called out, "Hae-in." At the time, she really thought that child had simply gotten lost. But looking back now, things were not that simple at all. The very next day, Mimosa had actually come straight to them. This was definitely not a coincidence. Someone must have reported them. If that person's goal was to cause trouble for Hisline, then the price would be huge. The more Annette thought about it, the more wrong it seemed. If all this was a trap, then the true culprit was probably him. Looking at the innocent-faced child in front of her, Annette finally couldn't hold back and asked, "Hae-in, was it you who reported us? Did you reveal Hisline's location?" Hae-in immediately panicked and loudly denied it, saying he absolutely hadn't done it, because the thing he feared most was being hated by sister. Annette quickly pulled him in her arms and told him to sleep obediently first. But this matter was clearly not over. If it wasn't Hae-in, then who exactly was causing trouble behind the scenes? She had to find that person as soon as possible. Otherwise, there would only be more and more trouble later. Only one final day remained before the deadline with Madame Mimosa. Although on the surface, everyone was happily playing with water, Annette knew very well that she did not have much time left. Looking at Hisline and Hae-in standing together, they were still so awkward, with no tacit understanding at all. But tomorrow's plan had to rely on cooperation between the two of them. Since there was no time to slowly get them used to each other, she could only take a gamble. Annette decided to split everyone into two teams and use a competition to forcibly bring them closer. The ones wearing red scarves were the raspberry team. Sasha was already excited and ready. The ones wearing peanut-colored scarves were the other team. Success or failure depended on this one move. Whether it would work depended on this cooperation. Annette made her little calculations in her heart and deliberately forced these two sworn enemies onto the same team, hoping they could take the chance to develop some teamwork. With her command, water instantly splashed everywhere. The game officially began. But who could have thought that, just as Hisline was splashed in the face with water and had not yet reacted, Hae-in beside him not only failed to help, but instead held a basin and gloated from the side, laughing loudly and mocking him for deserving it. Annette nearly spat blood, watching from behind. These two were supposed to be teammates. Why were they fighting among themselves before they had even united against the enemy? Looking at Hae-in's completely unmanageable temper, Annette fell into total despair. At this rate, tomorrow's plan was probably completely hopeless. Looking at Hisline lowering his head, everyone thought he had been frightened. Even Hae-in was laughing smugly at the side. Annette soon discovered that she had completely misjudged him. How was that fear? That gaze was clearly one of someone who had been thoroughly angered. Hisline had no intention of backing down. He directly picked up the bucket and splashed it back at Hae-in. Now things were really troublesome. The original water fight instantly turned into a real contest between the two of them. Neither one was willing to yield. This battle of the century finally ceased fire. Hisline and Hae-in were both exhausted, and neither had gained the upper hand. The children beside them immediately switched on mockery mode, pointing at them and shouting, "Idiots!" The tense atmosphere vanished all at once. Annette had originally been quite worried, but now she couldn't help laughing aloud. It seemed these two sworn enemies actually had quite a bit of tacit understanding when it came to acting stupid. All right, the show was over. Annette called for everyone to hurry back inside. Annette finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking Hisline was safe now and no longer had to be punished by that terrifying woman. She was just sighing over how much hardship the child had suffered when a sinister voice suddenly sounded. "I knew you were hiding here, Before Annette could react, Putrio had already chased after them with his people and grabbed Hisline tightly. "Did you think I wouldn't find you if you ran away?" Annette shouted anxiously, but it was no use at all. Putrio had completely erupted now and started cursing Hisline viciously. Putrio cursed loudly, saying he had to teach this runaway little beast a lesson. Annette recognized him at a glance. This man was Viscount Putrio. He was not only the culprit who had left Hisline with psychological scars, but also a deranged merchant. As long as he could make money, he would not even spare living people. To put it plainly, he was a thorough human trafficker. Putrio stared fixedly at Hisline, his tone filled with a sick possessiveness. In his eyes, this child was only his private property and could never dream of escaping in this lifetime. Annette rushed straight forward and loudly scolded Putrio, telling him to let go. When had Putrio ever suffered such humiliation? He raised his hand, wanting to lay hands on Annette. At this critical moment, the real savior arrived. Heinli. He rushed out like a small cannonball and protected his sister tightly, even giving that old bastard a fierce blow in passing. "You must be tired of living if you dare touch my sister." Putrio screamed, loudly in pain. The surrounding children also began pointing and whispering. Now this sanctimonious Viscount had truly kicked an iron plate. Just as Putrio was about to fly into a rage, Mimosa finally appeared. She coldly asked, "What exactly is all this noise about?" Putrio, who had been fierce and vicious a moment ago, changed his face faster than flipping a book, immediately putting on a fawning smile. He hurriedly introduced himself, afraid that she had forgotten that he was the distinguished guest with an appointment today. Annette took the chance to protect Hisline and retreat to a safe area. Mimosa did not give this old man a pleasant expression at all. She only said coldly, "Go inside first." As soon as Putrio sat down, he began showing off, saying he was in the slave business in Peldes. His goal in coming this time was extremely clear, to take back that brat who had made him lose face. He suddenly pointed at Hisline and shouted, "That's the boy." He said Hisline had fled during the chaos and now had to go back with him. Madame Mimosa did not even raise her head and simply replied coldly, "Any child who enters this forest is under the protection of the forest orphanage. You cannot take anyone away." Putrio began throwing a fit, shouting that this was robbery of his property. Madame Mimosa did not want to waste words and directly named an astonishing number: 10 million gold coins. That amount of money was enough to buy dozens of adult slaves. Even Annette, listening from the side, was stunned. But Putrio, that old fox, saw through the other party's weakness at a glance. He knew Mimosa was anxious to protect that child. He sneered and actually raised the price on the spot, asking for 50 million right away. This kind of insatiable greed made Annette completely furious. This was no longer business. This was blatant extortion. Putrio, that old fox, saw through the situation at a glance. Since Mimosa was willing to pay 10 million, it meant there had to be an even greater secret behind this child. He even suspected that Hisline was a rare awakened one. Annette's heart sank. It seemed the secret of this forest had long since reached the ears of those greedy nobles. Looking at Putrio's face as he rushed in after smelling profit, Annette felt a wave of disgust. The old man slammed the table and directly demanded an outrageous price. He insisted on 50 million gold coins. Not a single coin less, or no one would be taken away. Madame Mimosa slowly set down her teacup, and her gaze instantly turned cold. "Since you're this greedy, this deal is completely over." Since they could not reach an agreement, Putrio simply proposed having the local Lord Corel judge the matter, saying they would meet in court tomorrow. Annette quickly supported Hisline and asked softly, "Are you all right?" Before Putrio left, he still deliberately rubbed salt into the wound. He sneered and told the two children, "You were actually trash abandoned by your parents." In his eyes, children were divided into only two kinds. Either they were the crystallization of love, or they were mistakes left behind by an accident. He pointed at Annette and Hisline and said, "You are those unnecessary mistakes. So obediently becoming my property is the only way for you to survive." After leaving behind those vicious words, that old bastard turned and left triumphantly, saying they would meet in court tomorrow. Annette stood in place, unable to say a single word. Those words that cut to the heart were sharper than knives. This time, Annette was truly furious. That old bastard had actually said such garbage to children. It was simply unforgivable. Hisline, on the other hand, calmed down. He comforted Annette and said, "Don't worry. In tomorrow's trial, I will make that man pay." For tomorrow's confrontation, everyone displayed their own abilities. Hae-in-lee actually ran off to rummage through trash cans, even saying seriously that this was not trash, but gathering intelligence on the enemy. Annette was not idle either. She searched through every old newspaper. Putrio was a famous person locally. If he really had any dark secrets, there would definitely be records in the newspapers. But the more she investigated, the more she felt something was off. Why would someone of his status come all this way and cling to them relentlessly? Although 50 million gold coins was indeed a lot, Putrio had come from so far away and even had to withstand pressure to ask the Lord for judgment. This behavior was far too ugly. Just then, Hae-in-lee came running over with a newspaper and shouted excitedly, "Sister, I found it!" As expected of Hae-in-lee, he was truly reliable at critical moments. The newspaper clearly stated that a terrible plague had broken out in Peldes. Now the truth was revealed. With a plague running rampant, who would dare buy slaves from there? The slave market was Putrio's money tree. Now that his business had completely collapsed, it was no wonder he was acting like a madman, determined to squeeze a fortune out of these two children. To him, this money was no longer just greed. It was his final lifeline. As expected, that was the real reason Putrio had come all this way. She had found his fatal weakness. Annette could not help laughing out loud. That expression scared even Hae-in-lee beside her. Hae-in-lee quickly called out, "Sister, tone it down. Right now you look more like a villain than the villain does." Annette did not care. She stared at the information in her hands. That clown was dead tomorrow. When the day of judgment arrived, Lord Corel finally appeared. Putrio hurried forward to greet him. He looked so obsequious that he nearly bent his waist into the ground. But the other man had no intention of paying attention to him. He did not even give him a proper glance and walked straight past with his people. An attendant coldly tossed out a sentence. "The Marquis values cleanliness. He is not accepting any greetings right now." Then he took out a spray in public and sprayed wildly into the air. The scene became painfully awkward. Annette muttered inwardly that Lord Corel's misophobia really lived up to its reputation. But before she could react, Putrio beside her suddenly changed expression. He grabbed Annette tightly and threatened in a low voice, "You've got some nerve. You actually dare to follow me here. You'd better behave today. If you dare say anything reckless, I'll sell you off as a slave." Annette was speechless. This old bastard was taking his anger out on a child again. Hisline, standing nearby, had already reached the end of his patience. Just then, a cough suddenly interrupted them. Lord Corel walked over with a cold face and demanded to know what all the noise was about. Putrio, who had just been so vicious, instantly changed his manner. Bowing and scraping, he explained that they had only been chatting. Lord Corel had no patience for his nonsense and slapped the table. The trial would begin now. Before the trial officially began, Putrio had even arranged a so-called forest welcome ceremony. A group of children surrounded Lord Corel and bowed. The scene looked lively, but it was all an act. Lord Corel clearly had no patience for it. He coldly interrupted and told Putrio to cut the nonsense and get to the point. At that, Putrio stopped pretending too. He abruptly stood up, pointed at Hisline, and began accusing him, saying the child had escaped during the fire and was outrageously bold. In the end, he even made a ridiculous demand and directly asked for a ransom of 50 million gold coins. What kind of trial was this? This was outright robbery. Putrio was getting carried away as he spoke, but then he could not hold back and sneezed loudly in public. This was like poking a hornet's nest. Everyone knew Lord Corel loved cleanliness above all else. He was so furious that he slammed the table on the spot and cursed Putrio for being unhygienic. Putrio was so frightened that he quickly apologized and tried to continue speaking, only to sneeze again. Annette watched from the side and could not help snickering inwardly. Now he was in big trouble. Surely everyone would not think he had some contagious disease, would they? This show was getting more and more exciting. Time went back to 3 hours earlier. Annette had done plenty of preparation for this trial. She specially went to Nampu to sound him out. On the surface, she was asking about Putrio's tastes, saying it was the most basic etiquette for receiving guests. How could Nampa know what she was thinking? He even praised her for being thoughtful and casually revealed the most important information. It turned out that this lofty Viscount Putrio was severely allergic to peaches. After Annette heard this, the corners of her mouth rose slightly. She immediately wrote it down in her notebook. Soon, a plate of fresh and tempting peaches was delivered to the trial venue. It turned out Annette's secret weapon was these fresh peaches. She had the children eat the peaches and secretly gave them a mission, telling them to deliberately get a little closer when welcoming him. The innocent children immediately followed her plan and acted extremely enthusiastic during the welcome ceremony. With that, the scent of peaches and the allergens instantly spread through the air. As expected, Putrio was hit on the spot. He painfully clutched his throat and coughed violently. That feeling was probably enough to make him suffer. The words contagious disease practically became a death knell at the scene. Lord Carell now only wanted to settle the case quickly and get far away from this old man who kept coughing. The verdict was handed down on the spot. Hisline officially belonged to Annette. Putrio not only lost the lawsuit, he was also cursed as a shameless scoundrel. He still refused to give up and scrambled forward to plead, but before he could get close, Lord Carell kicked him flying. In Lord Carell's eyes, he was no longer any kind of witness. He was a walking source of infection. Great. He failed to get any money and became an unlucky wretch everyone wanted to beat. Lord Carell completely exploded this time. He decided that Putrio had brought soldiers over because he wanted to murder him, the Lord. Once that crime was pinned on him, he would not only be exiled immediately, he would also have to hand over an astronomical sum of 1 billion gold coins. Putrio was now completely broke. How could he possibly produce that much money? If he could not pay it, then he could only become a slave for the rest of his life until the debt was repaid. Annette quietly watched from the side. This was exactly the result she wanted. Putrio was dragged away like a dead dog, still begging in despair. Unfortunately, no one would ever sympathize with him again. He was destined to spend the rest of his life in hell. With the crisp sound of scissors, chopped hair scattered all over the floor. Annette had finally accomplished her great work. She shouted excitedly for him to hurry and open his eyes. Hisline slowly opened his eyes and showed a brilliant smile, asking if this was right. Annette was completely stunned. This new hairstyle paired with that face was unbelievably handsome. While she was being love-struck, Heinli beside them could no longer sit still. Seeing the two of them so close made him unbearably jealous. Heinli shoved Hisline aside and shouted that it was his turn. Annette looked puzzled. Didn't you just get your hair cut? Heinli began lying through his teeth, insisting that it had already grown long and messy. Annette saw through him at a glance. This little guy did not want a haircut at all. He was clearly upset because Hisline was being doted on. Fine, then she would play along. Annette picked up the scissors and made a flurry of motions at the air. Hisline laughed as he watched from the side. So this was the legendary art of cutting hair without any hair. All done. Annette clapped her hands and told Heinli to hurry and look at the result. Heinli picked up the mirror and examined himself carefully in it. Annette's heart pounded nervously beside him. This was an air haircut. Surely he could not really see a difference, right? In the end, Heinli snorted coldly. Not only was he not angry, he instead revealed a satisfied smile and felt that now he was finally presentable. It seemed this little jar of vinegar was not only easy to coax. He was also rather easy to intoxicate with his own charm. He had been so sour just now, but now Annette could only awkwardly smile along. Meanwhile, Heinli was still admiring himself, feeling that his new hairstyle was simply stunning. Oh no! Only then did Annette realize that she had been too absorbed in cutting earlier. The floor was covered in Hisline's fallen hair. The instant Heinli lowered his head, Annette directly reached out and covered his eyes. If he discovered this, everything would be exposed. While Heinli could not see anything, Hisline hurriedly destroyed the evidence. Their cooperation was practically a perfect crime. Hisline was quite quick, and the evidence on the floor was finally swept clean. Annette clapped her hands and pretended nothing had happened. Since they were all dressed up, they should go accept the inspection. The two little guys still had not reacted. Inspection? What inspection? When they looked up, Mimosa was already waiting there. Judging by that serious stance, the real test had only just begun. Mimosa had been busy handling official business when she suddenly remembered that today was the agreed-upon day. The two little guys held hands, but inside they were incredibly nervous, waiting for the final judgment of the great Demon King. Mimosa looked up and swept her gaze over them. Then her eyes landed on Hisline's new hairstyle. The air seemed to fall silent. After a long while, she finally revealed a satisfied smile and praised Annette for keeping her promise. It finally passed safely. Hisline was overjoyed. Since they had obtained a pardon, he pulled Annette and prepared to head back, not forgetting to congratulate his sister. Annette finally breathed a sigh of relief too, and was about to take him and slip away quickly. Who would have thought that an icy voice would suddenly come from behind? Mimosa called her to a stop. There was no emotion in her tone, as she said only that she wanted to speak with Annette alone. Now, there was trouble. The heart she had just lowered rose again. No one knew what Mimosa was really planning. As soon as the door closed, Mimosa dropped a bombshell. Someone was digging up Annette's past behind the scenes and had even found her student file. Annette could hardly believe it, but that was not all. The other party had actually contacted the agency and planned to sell Hisline back to the slave market again. This was no simple prank anymore. This was an attempt on Hisline's life. Annette could no longer sit still. Who could be so vicious as to do something like this? Mimosa admitted that she had not found the culprit either. Then her tone suddenly changed, and she asked whether Annette was willing to investigate together. Before Annette could react, Mimosa began appealing to her emotions. She praised Annette for being clever and said she knew Annette cared about Hisline most. In the end, Mimosa actually bent down and sincerely asked Annette to help her. Back in the room, Annette had impulsively agreed, but now that she was sitting alone on the grass, she was completely at a loss. She had agreed, yes, but where was she supposed to catch the culprit? Just as Annette was worrying, the school unexpectedly organized an outdoor lesson. The teacher announced enthusiastically that today's task was to pick apples by hand. These children had hardly ever done this kind of work, so they were all extremely excited. Some even asked how many they had to pick before they were done. The teacher was quite laid back and said they could stop when they were tired. After all, everyone still had little arms and legs. However, the teacher emphasized one rule in particular. Absolutely no magic or special abilities were allowed. As soon as those words were spoken, Hisline and Haeinli were instantly speechless. Using cheats was impossible. There was no escaping this physical labor. Since she had no leads for the moment, Annette simply decided to focus on picking apples first. She thought everyone would definitely be especially enthusiastic about this kind of group activity. But when she turned around, she was dumbfounded. Hisline and Haeinli stood in place as if petrified, not moving at all. It seemed some methods were necessary. Annette activated professional babysitting mode. First, she praised them like mad, saying boys who knew how to pick apples were incredibly handsome. Then she struck while the iron was hot and suggested that everyone play a game, turning work into a competition. With this full combination attack, she refused to believe these two little proud boys would not take the bait. Annette directly announced that whoever could pick the prettiest apple would be today's champion. This move was practically a crushing blow. Watching the two little geniuses instantly get handled, Annette's little calculations clicked loudly in her heart. The originally lifeless orchard suddenly became bustling. Everyone threw themselves into it, afraid of falling behind. Annette ran back and forth through the grove, loudly calling for Hisline. Annette went over to ask about his progress. Without a word, Hisline directly took out a glossy red apple. Its quality was simply perfect. Annette could not help praising it repeatedly, saying it was definitely the prettiest one there. But who could have expected that Hisline's next words would completely throw Annette off? He actually wanted to give this champion apple to her. Annette quickly waved her hands and refused, saying this was a competition and if he gave it to her, he would lose. But Hisline remained calm. Winning or losing did not matter to him at all. As long as Annette liked it, that was enough. Hisline looked at her and said seriously, "No matter what we compete in from now on, I'm willing to lose to you." Looking at this well-behaved boy before her, Annette felt a pang of sadness. Such a sensible and considerate child had almost been sold back into slavery before. What kind of person could be so cruel to a little child? It was utterly insane. Hisline said softly, "Thank you, sister." Sister. Annette came back to herself, smiled, and accepted the apple, saying that this apple really was beautiful. Annette already had a list in mind. Although the range had narrowed, figuring out how to catch the culprit in the act was the real problem. Fortunately, she knew these little brats' details better than anyone. For now, her targets were locked onto two people. Vivian came closer and said, "Hey Inley, you actually picked so many apples." The first suspect was Vivian, Hey Inley's #1 fangirl. Everyone knew that Vivian was Hey Inley's #1 follower, to the point of never leaving his side. But this was not ordinary admiration. It was an almost crazed imitation. Whatever Hey Inley liked, she accepted without question. But the most frightening thing was that if Hey Inley hated someone, that person would have no good days ahead. Because Hey Inley looked down on Hisline, Vivian tormented him in every possible way in the original story. Vivian had really gotten bold this time. Using the chance to clean the office, she actually secretly flipped through the student files. Annette watched from the side and felt something was wrong. Was Vivian going to start bullying people behind the scenes again, like in the original story? But when she turned around, she ran into Vivian holding a love letter and going to confess to Hey Inley. Vivian asked softly whether he could accept this letter, but Hey Inley did not appreciate it at all. He snorted coldly and humiliated her on the spot. Hey Inley did not even look at it. He tore the love letter to pieces on the spot and said coldly, "So annoying. Get lost. Don't be an eyesore." This stunned all the onlookers beside them. He had given her absolutely no face. How could Vivian have ever suffered such grievance? She turned and ran away crying. Looking at her departing back, Annette felt her heart sink completely. Vivian was already the prime suspect. Then who exactly was the second suspect? That was right. It was Hey Inley, who clung to his sister all day. Look at his obedient, cute-selling appearance. He begged for praise and competed over wins and losses. And to beat Hisline, he picked a full 200 apples in one go. Hey Inley said proudly, "Sister, am I the best?" Annette casually praised him a couple of times, but in her heart, she already had an answer. After all, in this forest, who watched her most closely besides him? As Annette stroked his head, she probed, "Do you still remember that I said, I don't like bad children?" Hey Inley obediently answered, "Of course I remember. That's why I've always been holding myself back, so that Sister will like me." He smiled and promised, "I'll always be a good child for Sister." Looking at his innocent appearance, Annette felt very heavy inside. She truly hoped this was the truth and was unwilling to believe that those terrifying things had anything to do with him. Just then, Sasha suddenly pushed the door open and came in, shouting that the teacher was looking for Hey Inley. Sasha said the teacher had already found out that, in order to compete for affection, Hey Inley had stripped the entire orchard of apples. Now Hey Inley was completely speechless and could only leave first to deal with the trouble. Before leaving, he still did not forget to act spoiled toward his sister, saying he would be back soon. As soon as Hey Inley left, Hisline brought even worse news. He confirmed the previous rumors. There really was someone in the forest targeting him. Annette looked at Hisline and felt very apologetic. He had only just returned to the forest and already had to face all these upsetting matters. It had to be painful. Annette asked with concern, "Are you all right?" Hisline, however, acted very calm. He said he was fine. Everyone hated him anyway. Annette felt awful hearing this. This guy was casually saying dispiriting things again. She directly moved in front of Hisline and loudly retorted, "Who says everyone hates you? I like you very much. Even the trees in the forest definitely like you too. So don't be sad because of these things. No matter what happens in the future, that will never change. Do you understand?" For a moment, Hisline did not speak. He only stared fixedly at her. After a long while, he quietly agreed. Annette finally reminded him, "So there's really no need to worry. I'll protect you." At this warm moment, a scream suddenly came from far away. Annette immediately reacted. The voice sounded familiar. There was no time to think. Annette grabbed Hisline and ran, wanting to see what had happened. In the end, it was a false alarm. A little girl was sitting on the ground and crying loudly. It turned out she had lost her teddy bear. The little girl cried especially sadly, saying it was a gift from her future adoptive parents. Sasha recognized it at once and said this was the legendary limited edition teddy bear. Annette looked carefully and discovered that this accessory was the real deal. Its eyes were genuine sapphires. Such a valuable thing had simply disappeared. The little girl recalled that she had clearly placed it properly on the desk, but after she came back from picking apples, it had vanished into thin air. While everyone was at a loss, Julius walked over. His tone was extremely certain as he said it was definitely not lost. Someone had deliberately stolen it. Now the matter had become serious. A theft had actually occurred in the school. Julius looked solemn. He said stealing was a serious crime, and whoever was caught had to be punished severely. He even demanded that everyone immediately check their personal belongings. Annette quickly came forward to smooth things over, saying he would frighten everyone like this. A clever idea came to her, and she suggested playing a treasure hunting game. Everyone would search together for that super expensive blue-eyed teddy bear. The children all began moving, rummaging through the classroom. Hay and Lee searched with them too, but Annette felt that something was very wrong. Things had never gone missing here before. Why had something suddenly happened at this exact moment? Could this really just be a coincidence? Annette kept feeling that someone had to be causing trouble behind the scenes. Just then, a little boy shouted excitedly that he had found the teddy bear. But his next words instantly silenced the entire room. He said the thing had been personally found in Hisline's storage cabinet. With that one sentence, Hisline was directly pushed into the eye of the storm. So it really was you. Julius now had something to use against him and directly treated Hisline as a little thief. Daring to act in the sacred forest was no small crime. Seeing that he was about to get serious, Mimosa pushed the door open and entered. Now the situation became completely complicated. Julius directly played the victim first and, in front of Mimosa, insisted that Hisline had stolen Lena's belongings. Annette was the first to refuse to accept it. She shouted loudly that Hisline definitely had not done it. But Julius had evidence in hand. The item really had been found in Hisline's cabinet. Now the stolen goods were found with him, and Hisline had no way to explain. Everyone's eyes turned to the victim, Lena. Who could have expected that after holding it in for a long time, Lena would actually say it might have been done by a household fairy? This excuse was way too absurd. A household fairy? Only Lena could come up with such an excuse. She was obviously trying to smooth things over for Hisline. But Mimosa did not bite at all. She directly stared at Hisline and told him to explain clearly with his own mouth. Julius was even more relentless, insisting on asking whether he had touched any of Lena's things. All the pressure now fell on Hisline alone. He was completely forced into a dead end. Putrio's earlier frantic questioning of Hisline echoed in his mind. "You did it, didn't you?" Hisline had no choice at all. He had long since grown numb to being made the scapegoat. He even felt that explaining was unnecessary. At that time, he had only one thought: to run somewhere no one could find him. But who could have expected that just when he was about to break down, Annette would appear? She even hugged him tightly. This one embrace completely reversed the originally cold situation. At that moment, Hisline finally realized that he was no longer alone. Annette's trust became his only source of confidence now. With someone backing him up, he finally dared to shout the truth out loud. He announced in public that he had absolutely never stolen anything. His voice resounded through the entire hall. No one expected Mimosa to actually let it go directly. She said that since everyone said they had not stolen it, then this matter was completely over. Julius was stunned beside her. He was still refusing to let it go, insisting that the item had been found in Hisline's cabinet and that he had to be declared guilty on the spot. But Mimosa did not want the matter to escalate. She coldly said that once might only be a coincidence, and since the item had been recovered, the matter ended here. Annette could finally breathe. She said thank goodness several times in a row and hurried over to ask Hisline whether he felt unwell anywhere. Hisline only responded blankly. Seeing Annette so worried about him, he could not react for a moment. The most unhappy person in the room was Julius. In public, he labeled Hisline a kleptomaniac and even asserted that if this habit was not cured, he would definitely become a scourge when he grew up. Annette really could not listen anymore. Even if the other party was the etiquette teacher, she directly talked back and asked what right he had to decide that Hisline was the culprit. But Julius did not restrain himself. Instead, he acted even more arrogant. He said Lady Mimosa might have been deceived, but his eyes would never be wrong. Judging from his attitude, he intended to fight Hisline to the end. Since he was so certain, then they might as well make it big. Annette directly pointed at Julius and said he should put the ring on his hand up as a bet. Julius panicked completely and repeatedly refused, saying absolutely not. That ring was the symbol of his family, practically more important than his life. That was exactly what Annette had been waiting for. He did not even have that much courage, yet he dared to casually accuse people here. What kind of teacher was that? She turned her head and even asked the children beside her whether this was a bit wrong of the teacher. Julius was rendered speechless. He had really lost face this time. Julius truly went all in this time. In public, he made a harsh declaration, If the real culprit was someone else, he would give that family heirloom ring to Annette. He felt the matter was already settled and that he absolutely could not lose. Annette smiled brightly after hearing this, and even insisted on making a pinky promise with him. But who could have expected that Annette would immediately turn around and seek out Lena, starting to ask about that teddy bear? She asked whether Lena had shown it off everywhere, and said it was an adoption gift. Lena had no idea how serious the problem was, and admitted excitedly that everyone had seen it in class just now. Sure enough, this group of people had deliberately stolen the teddy bear because they knew it was important. Annette continued asking Lena exactly when she had taken the bear out. Lena recalled that it seemed to have been during the previous summoning class. Now the key to solving the case had appeared. Hae-in-Lee had not attended that class at all. That meant the only one present at the time was Vivian. She had thought she could rule out Hae-in-Lee's suspicion, but the next words slapped Annette in the face on the spot. Lena said that although Hae-in-Lee had not attended class, he later came to her privately, and she had specially shown him the teddy bear. Now all the clues were in chaos. Annette forced herself to calm down. She could not be led around by her emotions. For now, both Hae-in-Lee and Vivian were suspects. She suddenly turned and left. Since logic was getting nowhere, she would go directly to the scene to find answers. Annette knew very clearly that relying on these scattered guesses was not enough. She needed a more direct method to make the real culprit reveal themselves on the spot. To obtain key evidence, she decided to bring in reinforcements and went straight to the stern-faced Mimosa. Mimosa looked at Annette before her and asked whether she had a request. Annette did not hesitate at all and nodded in admission. It seemed that to catch that little thief, she was preparing to use her final trump card. Annette took the initiative to lean forward, wanted to whisper something to Mimosa. No one heard what she said, but this move clearly made the other party fall into deep thought. The moment she walked out the door, Annette finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was calculating how to catch the thief when someone unexpectedly appeared halfway. Hae-in-Lee suddenly jumped out and gave her a big fright. Hae-in-Lee asked with a smile, "Sister, what are you doing here?" Annette quickly tried to muddle through, saying she only had something to discuss with Mimosa. But Hae-in-Lee was not that easy to fool. He stared at her strange outfit and insisted on asking clearly. Seeing that she was about to be exposed, Annette hurriedly changed the topic and questioned why he had only just arrived. Hae-in-Lee mysteriously said that he had also just gone to do something important. Now it was Annette's turn to be puzzled. What exactly was this little brat doing behind the scenes? Hae-in-Lee smiled faintly and said it was a secret. Annette was completely stunned. This guy definitely had a problem. Before she could figure it out, Hae-in-Lee pulled her and ran back, saying that if they did not leave, they really would be late. The person who had brought in the slave traders and the real culprit who planned the theft were actually the same person. Annette did not tell Mimosa this. After all, it was only her intuition. As someone who had read the original work, she held a script no one else knew. If the person who had summoned the slave traders back then really was Hae-in-Lee, then without a doubt, the mastermind behind this theft case had to be him too. Hae-in-Lee suddenly remembered something and said the new clothes Annette had ordered had arrived, telling her to hurry to the changing room to pick them up. This made Annette extremely happy. The two of them rushed there excitedly. Looking at the room full of gorgeous formal outfits, Annette was nearly dazzled by the choices. Hae-in-Lee obediently waited outside the door and told her to take her time, changing and not worry. Actually, there was a reason Annette was so excited. She had long wanted to complain. What kind of male lead wore only one outfit from beginning to end? Even if Hisline had lived in a cave before, now it was time to change his look. Hisline finally changed, but he clearly had not adapted to this brand new outfit yet. He felt something was strange and even asked Annette whether it looked ugly. In the end, Annette was completely stunned. How was this ugly? He had simply reached a new level of handsomeness. She circled around him while praising that this outfit looked tailor-made. While Annette was busy helping him straighten his collar, she suddenly became serious. She said, "The way you acted in front of the teacher just now was really cool." She kept staring at Hisline, her eyes full of curiosity. She really wanted to know where Hisline had gotten the courage to stand up in public like that. In the original plot, Hisline was a punching bag. Even if he was bullied, he never dared say a single extra word. But the current him was clearly completely different. Hisline lowered his head and said, "That's because now I have you by my side." Annette looked at the boy before her and directly reached out to hold his face. That was right. Now they were partners fighting side by side. No one should even think about bullying him again. Annette directly took action and told Hisline that he had to become cold and confident from now on. He absolutely could not hang his head dispiritedly anymore. Hisline did not dare resist and could only obediently nod in agreement. Annette was fired up now. No matter who that thief was, she would definitely drag them out. In the end, the opportunity came even faster than expected. This time, it was Robert's turn to suffer. His most beloved dragon model had actually disappeared. That was the thing he usually treasured most. After hearing the news, Annette did not say another word and rushed straight to the scene of the incident. The very thing she feared had happened. Robert's missing toy really was in Hisline's cabinet. Now the entire room exploded. Hisline's storage cabinet again. This was already the second time stolen goods had been planted on him. Annette saw through the truth at a glance. This was no coincidence. The other party was specifically targeting the most precious items. They wanted Hisline to be completely isolated. Robert was still apologizing for rummaging through the cabinet, but the people around them had already begun pointing and whispering. The real thief was hiding in the back and watching the show. This time, even if Hisline jumped into a river, he would not be able to wash himself clean. Hayenli wore a malicious smile and mocked Hisline in public, saying he was nothing but a pitiful little thief. Annette shouted his name angrily, wanting him to shut up. But just then, Vivian also jumped out to add insult to injury. In a sarcastic tone, she said Annette was going too far in protecting her own, and she deliberately brought up Hisline's past as a slave. Once that label was placed on him, the surrounding discussion grew even louder. Everyone felt that a child born as a slave would definitely have crooked thoughts when seeing expensive things. The situation completely went out of control. Julius rushed over and grabbed Hisline, saying they could no longer stand by and had to take him away to teach him a proper lesson. Hisline was forcibly dragged away. Annette truly went all out this time. She spread her arms and blocked the way, shouting that until Lady Mimosa arrived, no one should even think about taking him away. Julius did not accept this at all and coldly ordered her to move aside immediately. Annette did not retreat a single step. Just as the two sides were locked in a stalemate, the savior finally arrived. Lady Mimosa pushed the door open and entered. Annette could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Julius was in a hurry to complain to Mimosa, who had just entered, insisting that this child had stolen someone else's toy again. Mimosa looked at the chaos before her and calmly asked Julius to let the child go first. Julius, who had been so aggressive moments ago, was suppressed by this one sentence and could only obediently release him. Although Hisline had temporarily escaped, judging by the atmosphere in the room, the trouble had probably only just begun. Mimosa began questioning them carefully. She stared at Robert, wanting to confirm exactly when the toy had gone missing. Robert answered quietly that after he returned from herbology class, the item was already gone. Mimosa repeatedly confirmed the timing. Sasha, standing nearby, remained silent as she observed, as if she had also sensed something was wrong. Just then, Julius eagerly jumped out to steer the narrative again. He said Hisline had always lived in a cave before and could not even understand the most basic herbology class. He threw this dirty water so quickly that he was clearly trying to pin the crime of theft firmly onto Hisline. Julius now completely refused to let go. He said Hisline happened to be free at that time and had more than enough time to sneak in the classroom and steal the item. Besides, now they had even found the evidence. Mimosa was silent for a long time. No one knew what she was thinking. The others watched from the side, and no one dared speak at this moment. The atmosphere was oppressive to the extreme. Mimosa finally spoke. She did not listen to any explanation and instead directly announced that they would discuss the punishment, telling Hisline to shut up and listen. That was not all. In the end, she coldly dropped one last sentence. If there was a next time, Hisline would have to pack up and leave. This final notice directly forced Hisline to the edge of a cliff. Annette shouted anxiously, saying Hisline had been wronged. But Mimosa had no intention of stopping and directly slammed the door as she left. Julia sneered and said it was truly foolish. The evidence was right in front of them, yet she was still covering for that kind of little delinquent. Hisline heard everything clearly beside them. He did not say a word. Before Julius left, he did not forget to shift blame. He threatened Annette, saying that if Hisline was expelled, it would all be because she had meddled too much. Hae-in watched coldly from the side. Looking at Hisline's back, his tone was full of disgust as he felt that Hisline was an incurable bastard. Vivian also jumped out at this time. She walked up to Annette and mocked her sourly, saying Annette had actually expected Mimosa to help. She stared into Annette's eyes and smiled obviously, saying Annette was even stupider than she looked. Now not only Hisline, even Annette had become the target of everyone's attention. Who could have expected that this was actually a shocking reversal? Annette, who had been desperately pleading just now, turned around and revealed a pleased smile. Mimosa had privately told her that she had announced Hisline's expulsion according to Annette's request. Annette quickly apologized. Her obedient appearance was completely different from just now. Mimosa was actually very puzzled. She could not help asking Annette exactly how she had predicted in advance that a second theft would occur. Annette calmly began reviewing the situation. She said that when the first theft occurred, Lady Mimosa had thought it was only a coincidence, so she had let the culprit off once. Annette knew very well that those people would never stop so easily. If she did not counterattack thoroughly, there would only be more trouble in the future. That was why she had taken the initiative to find Mimosa and use her authority to personally set this dead end trap. Privately, Annette could not help complaining that the crying act she had performed earlier to save him had been far too embarrassing. Mimosa looked at this little girl and admitted that she did have some cleverness, but she still gave the warnings she needed to give. She coldly reminded Annette that Hisline's safety was only temporary. If they ultimately failed to catch the real culprit, he would still have to leave. This was equivalent to giving Hisline a suspended death sentence. But Annette did not panic at all. She smiled and promised that the real fox's tail would soon be exposed. Mimosa's curiosity had now been thoroughly aroused. She could not help asking Annette what she planned to do next. Annette smiled slightly and immediately asked for several shiny treasures. Her requirements were rather high too. They had to be things the children had never seen before, items that looked outrageously expensive at first glance. Although Mimosa was utterly confused, she still found her an exquisite fountain pen and pocket watch. Annette held them in her hands and examined them repeatedly, already delighted inside. Who could have expected that after going to such great lengths to obtain these treasures, she actually thought they were simply too suitable to be stolen? Looking at Annette's villain-like smile, those little thieves were truly about to have terrible luck. Annette began reviewing the details of that day. When the items were lost, everyone had clearly been in another classroom attending class. Hisline's suspicion was eliminated. But Hae-in and Vivian had both left their seats midway. This meant that either of them had the chance to slip into that empty classroom. Since she could not catch them in the act, she might as well set a trap. Annette took out the shiny bait in her hand. She wanted to see who would be the first unable to resist reaching out. At this time, Vivian still knew nothing and was happily planning to go swing. Vivian's spoiled young lady temper flared up again. When she saw Annette sitting on the swing, she felt extremely unhappy. She walked straight over to declare her ownership, saying this swing was exclusively hers and telling Annette to hurry up and get lost. But how could she know that Annette was holding that bait in her hand, waiting for Vivian to come to her on her own? Annette shot back with one sentence. "This is public equipment. What do you mean yours or mine?" In the end, she even kindly pointed at the gloomy, broken swing beside them and told Vivian to sit over there. Now Vivian was completely embarrassed. While Vivian was still angry, she suddenly discovered that Annette was holding a shiny little object. Had the fish not taken the bait? Annette deliberately acted as if she treasured it greatly, saying this was no ordinary compass, but a sacred object that could lead her to her family. She even made up a touching story about a gentleman, saying she had carried it with her since childhood and was waiting for the day she could meet her birth parents. Seeing Annette's deeply emotional appearance, Vivian's gaze completely changed. It seemed Vivian had set her eyes firmly on this juicy prize. After hearing these words, Vivian could not help raising the corners of her mouth slightly, revealing a sarcastic smile. She leaned close to Annette's ear and asked, "Since this thing is so important, you must treat it like a treasure, right?" Annette sneered inwardly, knowing the other party had completely gotten hooked. Annette deliberately hid around the corridor corner just to wait here. The moment the target appeared, she immediately jumped out. Annette shouted loudly, "Hey Inley!" As soon as Annette saw Hey Inley, she excitedly flew toward him. Hey Inley quickly reminded her to slow down, saying that running like that would definitely make her fall. As soon as he finished speaking, Annette really slipped underfoot. Just as she was about to fall, Hey Inley steadily caught her in his arms. Now, both of them froze in place without speaking. As soon as Hanley caught her, he began taking the chance to blackmail her, insisting that Annette personally admit she simply could not live without this younger brother. Before Annette could react, Hanley could not help bringing up old grievances, saying she usually only knew how to dote on Hisline. His tone was full of jealousy. Annette had just wanted to explain a few things when Hanley got so anxious that he nearly jumped, saying what he really cared about was the new clothes she had brought back last time. It turned out Annette had busied herself for so long, and all those clothes had been prepared for Hisline. Now Hanley's jealousy had completely overturned. Seeing his wronged appearance, Annette was probably not going to be able to coax him this time. Hanley suddenly announced that from now on, he also wanted to wear the prettiest clothes. Annette looked at his already flashy outfit and could not quite process it for a moment. In truth, Hanley was full of a sense of crisis. He was afraid Hisline would look too good after dressing up and steal Annette's soul away. So he had to win back the advantage in looks. Just then, Hanley picked up a fountain pen from the ground and asked Annette whether she had dropped it. Only then did Annette realize that she must have lost it when she fell earlier. But one must never be deceived by his appearance. Hanley's cunning was far greater than Vivian's. Who could have expected that the accidental fall just now had all been Annette's scheme? She had done it so she could naturally show this item to Hanley. As Annette acted and thanked him, she took back the pen as a matter of course. Hanley was indeed drawn to it and curiously asked what it was. Annette deliberately acted mysterious and said this was a rare treasure, one she usually hid away and was reluctant to take out. Seeing Hanley's serious appearance, Annette's plan had clearly succeeded by more than half. Annette began making up a story for this pen. She said it was the only keepsake left by her parents, placed in her cradle when she was little. It was the final proof of that familial love. In truth, she only wanted Hanley to understand exactly how important this item was to her. As long as Hanley believed it, the following plan would be easy. After Hanley heard this, he was silent for a long time. In the end, he only replied, "I understand." Then, for some reason, he sighed and said Annette was truly very lucky. Annette was completely confused by this. Hanley explained that it was because Annette had something left behind by her parents. As soon as these words were spoken, Annette suddenly realized that Hanley's parents had actually left him nothing at all. She had focused only on advancing her own plan and forgotten to consider Hanley's feelings. This unintentional showing off was practically sprinkling salt on someone else's wound. To make up for this mistake, Annette quickly took out something and stuffed it into Hanley's hand, loudly announcing that this was her token of love for him. Now, it was Hanley's turn to be speechless. Hanley quickly waved his hands and refused, saying this was Annette's most precious brooch and he absolutely could not accept it. In the end, Annette directly delivered a straight shot. She said that the treasure she cherished most had never been any ornament, but Hanley himself. As soon as these words came out, Hanley froze completely in place. Clearly, it was a little too much for him to handle. Annette did not care about that and beckoned him over, personally pinning the brooch to his collar and reminding him that he had to keep it safe. Looking at the glittering light of the brooch, Hanley finally accepted this gift and softly said, "Thank you, sister." In the blink of an eye, it was the next day. While everyone was outside attending class, Annette slipped back into the classroom alone. Now this place was an empty city. It was the best chance to investigate the storage cabinets. There had been no one in the classroom during that period earlier. If the troublemaker wanted to act, they would definitely choose this moment. Annette walked toward the target step by step. Sure enough, inside Hisline's storage cabinet, she found the stolen compass. But who could have expected that Vivian would loudly refute everyone in the classroom, asking what right they had to say she was the culprit? Before anyone else could react, she immediately turned the accusation around and pointed at Hisline, saying he was the thief who had stolen the compass. Vivian stood there, making sarcastic insinuations, insisting that the item had been found in Hisline's cabinet. She even tried to muddy the waters, saying that during the outdoor class, everyone was a suspect. Just then, Annette stepped forward and replied coldly, "Stop acting. From beginning to end, the only person who knew this compass existed was you, Vivian. Other than you, no one else would have stolen it. In fact, that compass was not Annette's at all. It was bait given to her by Mimosa. She had deliberately made up a lie and dressed it up as some family heirloom just to make Vivian take the bait. This was no accident at all. It was a carefully arranged trap." After hearing that, Vivian completely panicked. "This is absolutely ridiculous." Annette laid everything bare. "So what if I admit I'm a bad person? Your little scheme was far too easy to guess." Annette's voice was icy. "You deliberately stole the children's most beloved things because you wanted everyone to hate Hisline. When you saw Lena crying so sadly, you must have been laughing to yourself, right? Because your plan had succeeded. Every time I stood up for Hisline, you must have been especially unhappy. That's why you even wanted me to betray him too. Your real goal was to leave Hisline completely isolated and helpless, turning him into an unwanted monster. Every bit of your malice is written plainly on your face." Vivian completely lost her composure this time. She stammered for ages, unable to form a single complete sentence. Seeing that the truth was about to come out, she grew desperate and started shouting in front of everyone, accusing Annette of using tricks and setting a trap. But she had forgotten that all the adults were watching from the side. Julius called out to her in an ice-cold tone, "Vivian, you have truly disappointed me." Great. She had originally wanted to harm someone else, only to drag herself down completely instead. Annette pressed forward step by step and directly asked the most painful question. "Why did you do this?" Vivian's tone was full of self-righteousness. Is it wrong to tell the truth? She even turned the accusation back on them, saying everyone else had violated the school rules first. Annette's tone was cold. "So it really was you? You were the one who contacted those slave traders too, weren't you?" Vivian was still desperately denying it, shouting at the top of her lungs that she had not done it. But Annette held the key evidence in her hands. "You were in charge of cleaning Mimosa's room. You must have secretly read Hisline's file, then contacted the Viscount in secret." Faced with solid proof, Vivian still tried to pretend she was innocent. Annette exploded and told her to shut up. "Stop lying. Watching your friend get sold off and suffer, would that really make you happy?" That sentence completely tore away Vivian's disguise. You actually wanted to push Hisline back into that hell. What you did was utterly vicious. With a heart this dark, who were you planning to target as your next victim? Vivian completely panicked. She tried to explain incoherently, saying she had never thought things would become such a big deal. "I only wanted him to leave this forest." Annette had finally forced her to confess with her own mouth. Though after this confrontation, Annette was completely exhausted. Looking at Vivian collapsed on the ground in such a wretched state, Hae-in-Lee only felt disgust. This scene was truly humiliating. Vivian was still making one last struggle. Crying, she shouted at Hae-in-Lee that she had done all these bad things for his sake. Hae-in-Lee coldly asked back, "For me?" This excuse left him utterly speechless. Vivian was still desperately shifting the blame. She said that since Hae-in-Lee hated Hisline, she had only been helping Hae-in-Lee. Before she could finish speaking, Hae-in-Lee cut her off coldly. "Who exactly told you to do this?" Vivian still tried to act pitiful, saying aggrievedly that Hae-in-Lee was going too far. But Hae-in-Lee did not fall for that at all. He grabbed Vivian's hand tightly and replied with a cold laugh. "The one who really went too far is clearly you." Hae-in-Lee spoke coldly. "Apologize. Apologize for every single thing you've done. Apologize to everyone here." The whole place fell silent. Everyone's eyes were like knives, fixed sharply on Vivian. Vivian finally broke under the pressure. She admitted everything in front of everyone. She had stolen those precious belongings and despicably framed others for it. She even had the nerve to say to Hisline that she had only been confused at the time and had not truly wanted him to become a slave. Hisline just looked at her coldly and did not spare her a single word. Mimosa directly ended this farce. Since the matter had now been thoroughly investigated, it was time for Vivian to pay the price. Until Vivian properly reflected on her actions, she would be sent to the Forest Saintus. Hearing that name, Vivian froze completely. That was no good place. In name, it was a saintess who educated children. In reality, it was endless torment day and night. It was every bad child's nightmare. Cries and screams echoed there all day long, and no one who went in ever came out smiling. It was practically a living hell. Vivian completely panicked. She knelt on the ground and desperately begged for mercy, crying that she truly knew she was wrong. But only remembering to regret it now was already far too late. Julius was frantic with anxiety. He had never expected this matter to have nothing to do with Hisline. Looking at the family ring in his hand, he began to think of backing out. For the sake of one casual promise, handing over something so valuable was something he simply could not bear to do. Since he did not want to give it up, he could only hide first. As he ran, he kept looking back. If he disappeared for a few days, he should be able to get out of this, right? Julius was just planning to sneak away, but before he had taken more than a few steps, someone called out and stopped him on the spot. When he turned around, Annette was standing perfectly fine in front of him with Hisline. Looking at Annette's smiling little face, Julius's heart sank. This time, he really could not get away. Annette tilted her head and asked, "Teacher, where are you rushing off to?" Annette smilingly blocked his way. "Teacher, you wouldn't be trying to run away, would you?" Julius's heart sank. This little girl had actually come straight at him with terrifying precision and blocked him off. He hurriedly gave an awkward explanation. "How could that be? I just suddenly had something urgent to take care of." Annette did not buy that at all. She stared at Julius and said, word by word, "The most urgent thing you should be taking care of right now is apologizing to Hisline, isn't it?" Julius looked completely incredulous. "Apologize? Are you joking?" Annette's attitude was very firm. "That's right. You must apologize properly because your misunderstanding hurt an innocent child." The corridor was terrifyingly quiet. Julius was silent for a long time, but in the end, he still compromised. He walked up to Hisline and said in a low voice, "I misunderstood you. I shouldn't have treated you that way." No one had expected this stubborn man to actually lower his head. Julius bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry." Hisline stood in place without saying anything. After apologizing, Julius immediately changed his attitude, feeling that he had already shown more than enough respect. He turned around and wanted to slip away as quickly as possible, but Annette reached out and stopped him directly. "Teacher, have you forgotten something? An apology alone won't do. The ring you promised, you need to hand it over now." Julius was completely dumbfounded this time. So Annette had been waiting for him here. This ring of Pluto was no ordinary thing. It sealed ancient magic and could even summon a powerful mage at any time. Julius was extremely reluctant to part with it, but then he thought, since he had already agreed, he could just let this little girl play with it for a couple of days. After all, she did not know the contract spell at all. This treasure would return to his hands sooner or later. What an ignorant little girl. Annette softly recited the spell, Pluto Vimeria. In an instant, thunder roared and lightning flashed. Julius was completely stunned. How could she possibly know the secret to activating the ring? With the ring of Pluto successfully in hand, Annette's smile was incredibly sweet. She even politely apologized to the teacher. Julius completely lost his composure this time. He reached out to stop her, but he could not find any excuse at all. He could only watch helplessly as the two children swaggered away with his treasure. Who could have expected that Annette had actually been hiding a big secret? She had long since read the original novel thoroughly. A high-level spell like this was simply child's play to her. This ring would definitely be of great use in the future. She had to keep it safe. Just as Annette was making plans in her room, a hurried shout suddenly came from outside the door. "Sister, what on earth had happened in the middle of the night?" It turned out that Hae-In-Lee had come running over in the middle of the night, hugging a pillow. Acting spoiled, he insisted on sleeping with his sister. That sudden leap nearly sent Annette to the afterlife. She quickly signaled for him to keep his voice down. After all, Hisline was still sleeping nearby. Hae-In-Lee was not worried at all. He felt that this little bit of noise could not possibly wake anyone up. He took the chance to burrow into Annette's arms, calling her sister as sweetly as honey. In everyone's eyes, Hae-In-Lee had always been a well-behaved and adorable child. Annette's heart was full of guilt. Hae-In-Lee clearly trusted her so much, yet she had once suspected him and even treated him as the culprit. Looking at this innocent child before her, Annette decided not to hide things anymore. She took a deep breath. "Hae-In-Lee, there's something I want to confess to you. Actually, I've always had my own plans. Annette took out the fountain pen in her hand and told Hanley everything about all the plans she had secretly carried out during this time, holding nothing back. Since they were going to work together, they had to be completely honest. She just did not know whether Hanley could accept this cruel truth. Annette lowered her head and quietly said, "I'm sorry." She felt terribly guilty, afraid that what she had just said had hurt Hanley. But in the end, after Hanley listened, he froze for a moment. Then he actually burst out laughing. "Just because of that, you made me nervous for nothing." He spread his hands with a relaxed expression. "Anyone who looked at me would think I was suspicious, right? If it were me, I'd probably suspect me too." Now it was Annette's turn to be stunned. She had thought this would be a heartfelt confession, so how had the mood suddenly changed? The more magnanimous Hanley acted, the more uncertain Annette felt. Was this child really as simple as he looked on the surface? Hanley gently comforted her, saying it was all fine, which only made Annette feel worse. She felt that Hanley was deliberately pretending to be generous so she would feel better. Annette completely broke down. She called herself a terrible sister. She suddenly lunged forward and hugged Hanley, squeezing him so hard that he nearly stopped breathing. Hanley hugged her tightly in return and said in a firm voice, "You are the gentlest sister in the world." But just then, Hanley's gaze suddenly changed. He knew very well in his heart that the one truly full of bad intentions was actually himself. Time went back 30 minutes. In the castle late at night, Vivian quietly hid alone in her room, sneakily fiddling with the box on the floor. Who could have expected that the door would suddenly be pushed open? Hanley stood quietly at the doorway and saw everything. Vivian was startled. She pointed at the doorway and could not speak for a long time. Then she suddenly stood up and shouted at Hanley, "I'm going to tell everyone what you did." Hanley pressed closer step by step, his voice so cold it made one's hair stand on end. He asked Vivian in return, "What exactly did I do? The one doing bad things is clearly you, isn't it?" Vivian completely exploded. She shouted that it was a lie, that Hanley had clearly told her with his own mouth, that there were interesting things in the room on the far right of the third floor. Vivian finally realized what had happened. Trembling, she asked Hanley, "You were using me from the very beginning?" Hanley had known long ago that with Vivian's personality, unable to keep anything to herself, she would definitely report the secret base. She would even come up with ways to bully Hisline in order to attract attention. All of this had been part of his plan. Vivian thought she had found leverage over him, but in reality, she was only the most obedient pawn in Hanley's hand. Faced with Vivian's questioning, Hanley merely replied lightly, "Maybe." Vivian completely exploded this time. She had finally seen the truth clearly. So Hanley had used her and then thrown her away. Also, he could keep Annette to himself. But not only did Hanley not panic, his smile became even more arrogant. He mocked Vivian, saying it was a shame she did not write books with that imagination of hers. Vivian stomped her feet in anger, pointed at him, and shouted, "I'm going to tell Annette right now, and let her see what kind of person you really are." Vivian had just turned to go complain, but before she could step out the door, Hanley blocked her tightly. His voice was icy. "She absolutely cannot know, because Annette hates disobedient bad children the most." Vivian was completely stunned. She never would have expected Hanley to say something like that. If you're going to do bad things, then you have to hide and do them in secret. You absolutely can't leave any traces behind. Vivian sneered and warned him, "Annette will see your true face sooner or later. Then she'll leave you completely." But Hanley said calmly, "That's fine. I just have to follow her, even if it's to hell." The moment those words came out, Vivian was completely dumbfounded. She called him a madman. Who could have expected that this seemingly noble boy had such terrifying obsession in his heart? Hanley coldly left behind one sentence, "Goodbye, Vivian." Though he spoke decisively, the other person's curse-like words still kept circling in his mind. "Annette will discover your true face sooner or later, and then she will abandon you completely." Impossible. Annette would absolutely never do that, because from the very beginning, she had been different from everyone else. But could this almost obsessive trust really bring him the ending he wanted? Hanley curiously asked his mother, "Mother, where are we going today?" As his mother tidied her clothes, she dropped a huge bombshell. "Today is an important day. We're going to meet your father." Hearing that, Hae-in froze completely. After all, that man had always existed only in his mother's descriptions. His mother reminded him softly, "You haven't forgotten what I told you about your father, have you?" According to the rumors, Hae-in's father was unbelievably impressive. Not only was he the greatest mage of the era, he was also the lord of the magic tower. Even more absurdly, not only was his noble title frighteningly high, he also held countless riches in his hands. He was the absolute top-tier rich, handsome man. But looking at the shabby state of their home, Hae-in could not help asking the question from the depths of his soul. If my father is so rich, then why are we still poor enough to hear coins rattle? What exactly went wrong? His mother finally spoke her true thoughts. "Since he's that rich, we can go get some out of him. He can't possibly refuse to care for his own son, can he?" She sighed and said bluntly that she really could not hold on by herself anymore. She had to find someone to rely on. Hae-in only half understood. He merely asked quietly, "Will father like me?" His mother pulled him into her arms and comforted him with a smile. "Of course he will. Our Hae-in is so good-looking. Who wouldn't like you?" His mother had clearly imagined things too beautifully. She thought that if she brought the child along, that man's heart would soften. But when the other party looked at Hae-in before him, he felt only disgust. He even thought the appearance of this illegitimate child was an insult to his status. His mother knelt humbly on the ground, tightly hugging the man's leg as she begged, "But he is your own flesh and blood." The man merely sneered. "Filthy people can only give birth to filthy seeds." At that moment, his mother finally realized that she had been terribly wrong. Hae-in would never forget that day. The man called his father, pointed at his nose, and cursed him, saying he was nothing but a lowly monster and was not worthy of being his son at all. Just when Hae-in was at his most hopeless, his mother gently hugged him and said softly, "It's all right. Let's go home." Hae-in thought that at least he still had his mother to rely on, but he never expected that this would be the last bit of tenderness. That very night, his mother disappeared completely too. There was no unavoidable hardship forcing her hand. She had chosen on her own to abandon Hae-in and leave without looking back. From that moment on, Hae-in was completely alone. Just when Hae-in was at his most hopeless, Mimosa appeared. She specialized in searching for children with potential. Looking at Hae-in in the rain, she said, "If you have nowhere else to go, would you like to return to the forest with me? There are many companions like you there." At that time, Hae-in had long since given up on the world completely. He merely replied indifferently, "Anywhere is fine." Hae-in thought he was trash abandoned by the whole world. But in other people's eyes, he was an unreachable genius. Everyone began spreading the word that this new child had the highest magic rating, first class. It was unbelievably cool, but his personality was far too withdrawn. Everyone called him the Thorn, and no one dared to approach him. Just as Hae-in hid alone in the shadows, feeling that his life would probably stay like this forever, Annette suddenly appeared. Not only was she not afraid, she openly invited him instead. "Do you want to play together?" Looking at this girl with a bright smile all over her face, Hae-in felt his cold heart waver for the first time. Annette took the initiative to move closer to Hae-in, cheerfully introduced herself, and even called out his name right away. But Hae-in did not appreciate it at all. Like a little beast covered in thorns, he coldly threw out one sentence. "You're dirty. Stay away from me." Anyone else would have been scared off long ago. But Annette acted as if nothing had happened. Not only was she not angry, she clung to him even more persistently. Hae-in thought this girl was simply baffling. She had suddenly barged into his life like this, and no matter how he mocked or sneered at her, Annette simply could not be shaken off. He never expected that this strange girl would become the one and only exception in his life. Annette was always looking for different topics to talk about. She excitedly said that she loved bread the most, and that her dream when she grew up was actually to eat as much as she wanted. Hae-in could not understand her logic at all. He only felt that this girl's way of thinking was far too strange. Finally, Hae-in's patience completely reached its limit. He suddenly turned around and shouted at Annette, telling her to disappear from in front of him forever. Seeing Annette lower her head without speaking, Hae-in's heart sank. Oh no, he had really made her cry this time. But who could have expected that Annette would suddenly lift her head? Not only were there no tears in her eyes, they were instead full of little stars of admiration. She shouted that Hei-In-Lee was simply too cool and that this explosive power was really strong. Hei-In-Lee was completely stunned. He had clearly been being fierce to her, yet she actually thought it was charming. Hei-In-Lee completely lost his temper. Helplessly, he asked, "Do you like me that much?" Annette answered loudly without even thinking, "I super like you." This time, it was Hei-In-Lee's turn not to know how to respond. Hei-In-Lee finally relented. He said, "Since you want to play so badly, then come with me." Annette thought her persistence had finally moved him, and she excitedly followed behind. But when they reached the lakeside, Hei-In-Lee pointed at the frozen lake and said calmly, "We'll play a game here." Annette had not yet realized the danger. She foolishly asked what game they were going to play. Hei-In-Lee smiled faintly and said, "The game we're playing is to see who can walk across this thin ice." How is this a children's game? This was clearly risking one's life. Hei-In-Lee looked disdainful. "What? Are you scared? If you don't dare to play, then get lost. You were the one who came to me first, and now you want to back down." He walked away without looking back, thinking this would let him shake off this trouble. But the wind that night was truly cold to the bone. Who could have expected that Annette would not hesitate at all and would step straight onto the ice? This time, it was Hei-In-Lee's turn to panic. He shouted loudly, "Come back. It's too dangerous there." Annette still waved with a smile and said she was fine. But before she could finish speaking, the ice beneath her feet completely cracked apart. With the sound of her falling into the water, something truly terrible had happened. Hei-In-Lee screamed Annette's name until his voice tore. He rushed forward with all his might, shouting for her to hold on. But Annette had already lost consciousness and was sinking toward the bottomless lake. At that critical moment, in the icy depths, he finally grabbed Annette's hand tightly. From that moment on, the relationship between the two of them completely changed. No matter where they went, Hei-In-Lee and Annette were inseparable. Looking at Annette's radiant smile, Hei-In-Lee realized for the first time that without this girl, his world would have no meaning. To Hei-In-Lee, Annette was the warmest existence in the entire world. While Annette was asleep, Hei-In-Lee finally could not hold back and revealed the truth. It turned out that when the secret base had been discovered back then, he had actually been the one who personally informed on it. He felt despicable and awful, but at the time, he had truly just been too afraid. He tightly held Annette's hand. How could he ever repay this guilt? The reason he had chosen to inform on them was because he was afraid Annette would be stolen away by someone else. Hei-In-Lee apologized while crying. Each, "I'm sorry," made the listener's heart feel truly awful. But he did not notice at all that Hisline beside them had actually never been asleep. Now there was trouble. The rules in this place were simply terrifying. As soon as someone lost 45 points, they would be sent away immediately. Hisline was staring at the notice, while Hei-In-Lee beside him could not even recognize the words. Hisline could not help turning on his venomous tongue and asked whether Hei-In-Lee's eyes had been bitten by mosquitoes. That sentence directly stirred up a hornet's nest. Hei-In-Lee had already been in a bad mood, and now the two of them started fighting completely. Hisline finally laid his cards on the table. He directly questioned Hei-In-Lee, asking why he had betrayed the location of the secret base. Hei-In-Lee froze completely. He never expected this matter to be exposed in public. What he was most worried about now was Annette finding out the truth. Unexpectedly, Hisline actually agreed to keep his secret. His reason was not to help Hei-In-Lee, but because he did not want Annette to be sad. It seemed that in Hisline's heart, Annette's feelings were more important than any truth. Hei-In-Lee was completely struck down this time. He felt that he had lost miserably in the competition of liking Annette. Just then, Annette suddenly appeared. Curious, she asked what the two of them had been talking about. In the end, these two were guilty as could be. Without saying another word, they turned and ran. Annette chased relentlessly from behind. Now she had to chase them again. Annette felt as if she had been abandoned. Those two boys had actually acted secretly behind her back. This feeling of being excluded was really unpleasant. Just then, a new message appeared on the bulletin board. Tomorrow, the level test would be held. At the same time, Mimosa was secretly speaking with someone. The special child they were talking about was clearly Annette. It seemed tomorrow's test was destined not to be peaceful. This kind of pure talent was simply unheard of. Mimosa was very certain that Annette's potential was at least special grade, or perhaps even higher. Tomorrow's level test would forcibly awaken her. In Mimosa's eyes, living an ordinary life would be the greatest waste. As long as the awakening succeeded tomorrow, Annette would stand at the very top of all ability users. If she truly lost her life tomorrow, then that could only be blamed on her fate. Annette had no idea that she was in danger. She was still full of anticipation for tomorrow.